marcha de guerra, como tudo que vem de longe. Guerreando aqui no tempo, pra comer um leite novo. Maracatu, oh maracatu.
Linda Rudoph is a longtime member of the Bird Club. She is a retired pharmacist from the University of Iowa Hospitals, right, Linda?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
And since she's been retired, she's been doing a lot of traveling, and we have benefited from her excellent photography and her wandering the world. So she is going to talk about her trip to Northeast Brazil tonight. So let's welcome Linda.
So thank you very much for that kind introduction, Karen. This talk is going to be about a trip to Northeast Brazil that I took. And I said it was the home of the indigo macaw, the araripe mannequin, and white-collared kites, and so much more. Brazil is the largest country in South America, and this was my second trip to Brazil. Okay, so you can see that Brazil takes up the whole part of the continent. Well, you're going all the way back. There we go. Okay. Let me see if I can hide. There we go. Okay. And here we are with a closer up view of Brazil. And where we went was the northeast section, which is the part that goes out into the Atlantic Ocean. And from this map, you can see that, like in most countries that border an ocean, most of the people live along the ocean, and that's where all the big cities are. And the entire central west part of the country is taken up by the Amazon basin and the Amazon rainforest. Brazil's the 5th largest country in the world and has 214 million people. And the part that we visited is quite modern and relatively easy to travel in. Brazil's really fun to get to go to. I like it quite a bit. This was my second trip. So I flew into Sao Paulo, which is the Southern Red Star. And when you land, you transfer planes, and I took a LATAM flight up to Recife. The trip was supposed to take place in January of 2022, but if you remember back, that was right when the Omicron variant of COVID was just running wild across the country. And so they canceled that trip and rescheduled it for March. If anybody ever has to take a LATAM flight, you can always talk to me. That is not an easy thing to do. They're a difficult airline to navigate. And I was glad that I'm a seasoned traveler. Otherwise, I think I would have been in tears more than once. In Recife, we went to a local wetland, and this is a pretty common heron. This is a striated heron. He's posing nicely for us. And then we got to see purple gallinules. And I'm probably kind of a silly birder, traveling birder, in that even though purple gallinules are in the United States, I just love to see them. We don't have them in Iowa, but you could go down to Florida or Texas to see them. And I'm just think their huge yellow feet and legs are quite striking. Here he is actually walking on lily pads. And so those big feet distribute their weight and allow them to walk on top of water plants. And then I like this photo because it shows the undersides of their wings are completely black. But the top sides, if you look at the flight feathers, you can see that the top edge has the pretty blue hue, and then the rest of the feather is black. So I just like those photos. We were standing in the wetland, by the wetland on a sidewalk, looking at all the birds, and all of a sudden there was this movement under the water. It was huge. You could see there was something really massive under the water, but I had no idea what it was. I was kind of scared, and it almost seemed like you were seeing the Loch Ness Monster in real life. It was just so totally unexpected to have something big in this relatively small wetland area. And all of a sudden a head poked up, and there were a couple of capybara there. And capybara are actually the largest rodent on Earth, and they can weigh between 70 and 40 pounds. Then we flew from Recife to the Isla Fernando de Noronha. This is a small archipelago in the Atlantic Ocean. And so Recife has a star, and the archipelago is kind of where the arrow is pointing to. It has a very small population of 3,000 people, and everyone lives just on the main island, and almost everything is a national park. It was beautiful to get to go see it. I mean, just stunningly beautiful. So we stood on cliffs facing the ocean, and there were breeding seabirds that were flying back and forth in front of us, bringing food to nestlings, carrying nesting material, just busy flying around. And I could have just stood there, and we did stand there for hours and hours watching them. I have a relatively new camera, and for all you photographers out there, I'm still trying to master it. And it was just a wonderful opportunity to get to take one photo after another of a flying bird. This one's a white-tailed tropic bird, and they were putting on quite a show. So here's one of that's coming right at me. And here you can see, I love tropic birds because their little feet kind of stick out right where their tail is. They're kind of like little paddles. I just think they're adorable. And then here he is in good light. Sometimes tropic birds can have pretty complex courtship displays, but this was they were past their courtship time. But these two tropic birds were obviously flying together. So it was fun to take this photo. They were nesting black noddies. So they just make this most minimal mud nest imaginable. It's amazing they can raise any babies at all. And here one's flying by. You can see how delicately they're colored with that white crown and little white arc crescents around their eyes. And here's one that was actually flying below the cliff. So this is a top view. Then there were white terns, not too many, but you can see from this photo how thin their bill is, and they're actually more closely related to noddies than to terns. And before the advent of GPS and good maps, and maybe when people were actually sailing in boats, sailors used to use white terns to know that land was close by because they never fly very far out to sea. I read on Wikipedia that the limit was about 28 miles from land. So if a lost seaman saw a white tern, they knew that they were getting close to land. This is one of the bird species that has had its name changed. It used to be known as the fairy tern, and I like that name a lot better. They're small, ethereal seabirds, really pretty. Here's one that was flying by me. By far, the most common nesting seabird we saw was the red-footed booby. They were busy collecting nesting material. And of course, you can imagine for a booby, it's pretty hard to pick up those sticks and those long bills. And one thing I was not aware of is that there's actually a brown morph of a red-footed booby. And about 30% of the red-footed boobies on the island were the brown morph. So we got to see quite a few of them. Here's a booby that's actually landed in a tree getting ready to add some sticks to his nest. So you can imagine this bird with these long wings is trying to land on a branch with webbed feet and sticks in his beak. And not every landing was very graceful, that's for sure. And here's a pair of red-footed boobies copulating right below us. So that was fun to see too. And here's a red-footed booby, and he's coming into land, and you can see he's started to drop his feet. as he's getting ready to find a branch to land on. They were really pretty. We didn't get to see too many red-billed tropic birds. I think they're attractive birds too. It was weird being out on the island because there are really only 4 passerine birds. I don't ever recall being someplace where there were just so few passerines. You didn't even have to worry about what bird you were seeing because you just knew it had to be one of 4. So there were eared dove, house sparrow, and 2 endemic species, the Nerona vireo and the Nerona elania. So this is an eared dove. And here's the vireo. And of course, it looks very much like our vireos. Here's the elania. And I did not take a picture of a house sparrow. Rock cavies are 2-pound rodents that have been introduced to the island. And so far, they don't seem to be causing any trouble with the seabird colonies, so that's good. And then I was fascinated by these land crabs. I'd never seen a land crab before. And Isla Fernando de Noronha is one of 4 South Atlantic islands that have yellow land crabs. Their carapace is 4 inches across. And so with their legs, they're larger than your hand. And they were so funny. They'd be on the forest floor and they had little burrows. And if you got too close to them, then they would scurry over and hide down in their burrow. I liked them. And out on the island, we did see some of our birds that were far from home, or actually they're where they belong, but they seem far from home. This is a ruddy turnstone in breeding colors. And this is a black-bellied plover in non-breeding plumage. And then we saw cattle egrets. And it's not unexpected to see cattle egrets. You can see them almost every place you go in the world. So it's not a real surprise. But what was a real surprise was this guy. This is a squawko heron. And squawko herons are supposed to be in Africa and maybe a little bit in the Middle East and a little bit in Europe, but they're mainly African birds. So they have actually crossed the Atlantic Ocean. And we saw maybe 8 or 10 of these guys, many times in groups of 2s or 3s. And it's, you know, our guide wondered if they were actually breeding on the island. And they seem to have established a beachhead there. And it'll be interesting to see if they have a range expansion into South America. We flew back to Recife. We met up with more birds that would be joining us, and we were off to see birds. Recife is mostly surrounded by sugarcane fields that have just small patches of remnant forest. And not all the roads in Brazil are well maintained. We had a lot of rain in this area, and there were potholes that were filled with rain. So you couldn't tell how deep and dangerous the potholes were. And then the cane fields were just a muddy mess, kind of dangerous and slick and slimy to drive on. And I'll show you a picture here in a minute of a chasm that was in the road. It was probably, like a foot deep and 3 feet wide. I mean, it would swallow a teeny car. Our guide started mussing that he could make his fortune developing a video game based on Brazilian roads called the Hard Drive. And the winner would be the person who reached their destination first with no flat tires or broken axles. And players would, of course, get extra points for every bird spotted on the drive. So we had a lot of fun with that. Here's a picture of the potholes, and you can see the van in front of us is actually having to weave, and we were also weaving around the potholes because you just couldn't tell how deep they were. And here's a chasm that I was talking about, and this thing could just swallow you up. It was here that we saw the giant imperious wood sawyer. These are longhorn beetles that were bigger than my hand. And we saw a tree that they had attacked. And there was a huge pile of sawdust around the base of the tree. And the tree was in the process of dying. So they do kill the trees when they attack them. From Recife, we flew up to Fortaleza. So Recife is the bottom city and Fortaleza is up at the top. And then the rest of the trip, we just kind of wound our way from Fortaleza over 2 weeks' time down to Salvador. And Salvador is the airport that we flew out of, just to give you an idea. Our hotel in Fortaleza was right on the Atlantic Ocean. There was a lovely beach. And I went swimming one day. And surprisingly, I thought for the Atlantic Ocean, the ocean was so warm that it really wasn't inviting to swim. And it was like being in a sauna tub or something. I'd never been in an ocean that warm. This is a female blue dacnus that perched in front of us. Really subtly pretty. And here's a palm tanager. And if you look at his beak, you can see it's just stuffed with something in there. And he was busy foraging around and feeding nestlings. So this is a bird that we were talking about just a few minutes ago before the talk started. This is probably the best bird we saw on our trip, and it's called a white-collared kite. And our guide told us it was the rarest raptor in the world, with only 50 to 250 adult birds around. It's considered critically endangered. And it was fun to get to have such good views of such a rare wild bird. And what even made it more fun was it turned out to be one of the participants' 5,500 bird species spotted. So what a special treat that was for all of us. The hotel in Fortaleza had a nice lawn. This is a cattle tyrant that was busy foraging on the lawn. And a scaled dove was also there. So I tried to pick a broad range of different types of birds just to show you the different kinds of species that we saw as we tootled our way down to Salvador. And most of the areas that we were in were dry, arid scrubland, just to give you an idea. So this is a white-headed marsh tyrant. And here's a pretty fork-tailed wood nymph. And then this green kingfisher was fun. You can look and see he's got a minnow in his beak. And we got to, or I guess I'm not sure, we got to see them fishing and picking minnows out of a pond. This is a red-cowled cardinal. They were pretty common. And here's a rarer hummingbird. This is a Planalto hermit. And if you can see that long beak, so hummingbirds are interesting because a lot of them have beaks that are adapted to specific flowers. And their beak shape is determined by the flower that they prefer to nectar on. We continued on our way south, and we stayed at a cute little hotel that was nestled in the hills. And one of the rare birds to see it in this area is the white-browed guan. And we are unpacking our bags, and there is a white-browed guan to greet us. And we sat down to lunch, and often lunch is an open-air affair. And this bird actually had a name, Cleza, and she came and visited us at lunch and landed in the rice that we were serving ourselves from. So it turned out that the villagers had found her and brought her up to the hotel for the hotel staff to try to rehabilitate. They thought she was injured or something. And Cleza was completely wild. She slept outside in a tree at night. She's completely unrestrained, but obviously she was also quite tame. So then, being real birders, we had a debate as to whether she should count on our life list or not. And it turned out that she was the only white-browed guan that we saw. There were quite a few lizards in this drier area. This lizard's probably, maybe a foot, 2 feet long, something like that. This is a streaked flycatcher. And the pretty common rufous-browed pepper shrike. But I like this green-barred woodpecker with his red feathers on his head lifted up like that. There's quite a few turkey vultures down in Brazil, but they're a tropical subspecies. And so I included this picture. Do you see how his hind neck is white? And so that means that he's the tropical subspecies. And if you've never been in the tropics in South America, you may not realize that there are at least a gazillion different kinds of ant birds. And we didn't see too many since we weren't in the rainforest. A lot of ant birds do follow ant swarms and eat insects and bugs and even lizards and things like that that the ants are scaring up as they move along the forest floor. But this is a black-bellied ant wren that it does not follow ant swarms. And this is a narrow-billed wood creeper. And social flycatchers, which I think are kind of endearing. And a violet-throated euphonia. Often euphonias like mistletoe and big trees, and you don't always get to see them right at eye level like this guy. And here's a rufous-capped blackbird, which is a marsh bird. And one evening we did see a brocket deer, and the light's very poor, and she was busy crossing the road and gonna head right into the brush. This is a striped-breasted starthroat, a really pretty little hummingbird. Well, on these birding trips, we always laugh that no birding trip's complete without a visit to a water treatment plant or, sewage lagoons or a landfill or some really awful place like that. And we did visit a landfill on this trip, but this is the first birding trip I have ever gone to a amusement park to see a bird. We went to the Aragera water park. And so you line up with all the people in their swimsuits and stuff that you would have to go visit a water park for the day and pay your fee and go in. And when they built the Aragera water park, they knew that they had a special bird on the property, and a large effort was made to accommodate this bird. The area where the bird is kind of secluded. They've made a beautiful walk so people don't go off the beaten trail and disturb the bird or anything. And this is for the Araripe manakin. And the manakins are just located in a few areas. They have special habitat requirements. And so it was really fun to get to go to the water park to see this bird. We only got to see one. This is a very young male. If you look, you can see that he only has one tail feather. So the rest of his tail is still growing in. But the local people are really proud of their Reapy mannequin. And even on the taxi, they've got the photo. So it was really fun to get to see local people supporting a bird like that. There were lots of black vultures. And then Anguilla cuckoos are pretty common too. They have this spiky hairdo almost with their feathers. The other really, really cool bird we got to see on this trip was the indigo macaw. And what we did was we ate breakfast at 3:45 a.m. one day. And that meant that our guides got up even earlier because they cooked us breakfast. And then we all gathered by some vehicles that could go on very rough roads, and we drove until dawn. And so when we arrived and got out of the vehicles, we could hear a distant sound. We didn't know what it was. And we looked up and we could see macaws starting to fly out to feed for the day. We hiked down to the rim of a red rock canyon. So this is the view looking to the left. And here's the view looking to the right. It was beautiful. And there's not another person in sight. It was just us and the macaws. And here we all are, spread out on the canyon rim. And these are indigo macaws. And it was just the most wonderful experience to see these macaws flying in the wild like this. They called back and forth. It echoed through the canyon. They were just beautiful. Here you can see this macaw has a necklace, and you can see it has a number. And so there are not very many indigo macaws left in the wild. You can imagine that they're part of the pet trade. And so the researchers have tagged some of them to see how they're doing. So they have to climb down the canyon rim. They rappel down and catch a macaw and put these collars on them. And it didn't seem to bother the macaws at all. And here it gives you an idea of their nesting area. This rock wall had big holes in it that the macaws were going in and out of. There's about 1,200 macaws left in the wild. Almost all of them nest in this one canyon. So it would just take a wildfire or something like that to eradicate them in the wild. They are in the process of trying to transfer them to another canyon, at least some of them to another canyon, and start another breeding population. But the problem is the pet traders come and steal them right away. So it's a big problem. And then we got to see a baby macaw. So you can see the two adults are the two birds on the right, and the baby macaw is the one with the light blue bare skin. And he was so funny. He would come up, he'd like sneak out of the dark and come up to the edge of the nest place and look down. And it was like he thought, oh, I'm not ready to fly yet. And he would back up and he would disappear. And he did that repeatedly while we sat at the canyon rim. Because these birds are so endangered, we only were there just for a short, like about 2 hours. So we had plenty of time to see the macaws, but we didn't disturb them by staying too long. Here's some burrowing owls. And these are Cotinga cachalate birds. I've never seen this species before. And the thing that was funny about them was that they have a pretty large stick nest that they seem to be obsessed with remodeling. So they hang around the nest and they're always poking their head and picking out a stick and putting it someplace else. It was pretty funny. This is a rufous-sided pygmy tyrant, and he's just as teeny, a little fluff ball as you can imagine. And then this is a teeny hummer. So this is a horned sun gem that was just out on the floor of a arid area. And you can see that why it's called horned sun gem. It's got these two little bright horns sticking up on either side of his head. Really fun to see. He was just a minute little hummingbird. And this is a gray-backed churi, which is also a very small bird. And here's a striped-tailed yellowfinch. There are pretty flowers in this part of the desert tripe area. I really like these ones. They kind of formed a semicircle. And we did see a couple more ant birds. This is a silvery cheeked ant shrike and a Syncora ant wren. And then we're coming to the close of our trip. We went to a really pretty area of Brazil called the Chapada Diamantina. And this is an area where you can see there's uplifting and deep canyons. And we had a beautiful day. And we hiked up to a higher part of the area so that we could see the horned visor bearer. So this is a really special hummingbird. And when I looked on eBird, it's almost always pictured like this. So they spend a lot of time with their wings up and stretching their tails and stretching their wings. It was kind of funny to see them doing this. And oh, we were just thrilled to get to see one. And then this is a close-up of his face. And when hummingbirds nectar on plants, they can pick up pollen. And here you can see that he's got little pollen grains. And then, you know, they can go to another plant and cross-pollinate the plants. So it was fun to get to see that. Then we went to a pretty town called Lenchois, and we had a problem. So it's not common, but it's not unusual to have a problem on a birding trip. And what happened was our bus driver fell and hit his head and had to go to the hospital. So, and this happened at lunch on one of our final days. So the guides had to spend the entire afternoon. One of them had to spend the night in the hospital with them. And then they had to figure out, well, obviously he was not going to be driving for us to get us to Salvador. So they had to arrange a new bus driver. They had to arrange for the injured bus driver's family to come, and the family didn't drive. So they had to arrange for a taxi for the family to come. So it was a mess. And of course, you know, they couldn't guide us. So we missed a day of birding, essentially. And one thing we did was the guide said, you know, I think I remember there was like a little house or something with a lady who had bird feeders. She wouldn't mind if you went and visited. We kind of all looked at each other like, whoa, but you know, we didn't have anything else to do. And he said, it's kind of up that way, you'll see it. So we all trooped off, if you can imagine, with our binoculars and cameras, and knocked on a couple doors, and finally did find a nice older lady who was quite willing to have us come in. And she did have some fruit feeders, and she gave us fruit juice. And she was just happy to see us. And so this is a burnished buff tanager that was visiting her fruit feeder. And then this is a Sayaka tanager. So the new bus driver arrived, and but he had to have a mandatory rest period. So we didn't get out of that town as early as they thought we would, and we were off to our you know, the destination where we were going to fly out of, which was Salvador. And typically on these birding trips, they like to have a nice last dinner and, say goodbye to everybody. So we arrive in Salvador. It's late in the afternoon. It's a Sunday. And we realized the guides had forgotten that 5 of us need COVID tests that evening to get back to the United States. So there was a mad scramble to find a clinic that would give us COVID tests. And we went to the clinic. Well, driving to the clinic, there was a massive traffic jam. And our bus driver asked one of the policemen, what they had done was they'd set up a stop for it to test for sobriety. And the bus driver rolled down his window and asked the policeman if we could go down the side road and just skip the mandatory alcohol breathalyzer test. So we did that. We got to the clinic and it was shift change. So the participants that didn't need COVID tests that night just went to the restaurant. The rest of us waited in the clinic for what seemed like a very long time. We had our COVID test, that was fine, but we didn't have our results. And it was getting late, and one of the participants was leaving at 2 a.m. So it was getting very close to the time and he was going to be leaving, and we didn't have our results, but we went off to the restaurant, we ate a meal, we went back to the hotel, and finally I could hear all the phone calls echoing through the hotel that our tests had come back and they were all negative, and all the results were down at the desk for us whenever we wanted to leave in the morning. So that was a big relief. And this is just a pretty picture of Salvador. I can't really say that I got to enjoy the city because it was just extraordinarily stressful to try to get these COVID tests done before we had to leave. And that was the end of our Brazil trip. It was just a wonderful trip. And I'd be happy to take any questions. I guess I'll try to stop sharing. However I do that, I'm not sure. Let me see here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh, somebody asked me what camera I have. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Candy's nodding. Okay. So I have a newer camera. A year ago, a little more than a year ago, I was at a pond photographing tadpoles, and I lost my balance and fell right into the pond with all my regular birding gear. So that meant my phone, my camera, my binoculars, and my key fob. Plus I had hiking boots and of course my clothes. I mean, I was just wet from head to toe. And luckily the only thing that was hurt was my camera. Everything else was fine. So I had to get a new camera. And I was happy with my old camera, but they don't make it anymore. So I got a Canon R5. So that's one of the new mirrorless cameras. And then the lens is an R100 to 500 zoom lens. And you would think I kind of considered myself to be a competent photographer, but it's been a real learning curve how to do this camera. Hasn't been easy at all for me.
Your pictures were just gorgeous, though. Oh my gosh, you've learned really well. Wow.
Oh, thanks, Andy. Well, I do love to take photos. So, I mean, it's something, it's a joy for me.
Are there any more questions for Linda?
How long were you there?
About 3 weeks, Therese.
Weeks. Oh, a long time. Yeah.
Well, not long enough. I love Brazil. I mean, just like knocking on that little lady's house. I mean, she just welcomed us in. She had no idea who we were. We don't speak Portuguese. She doesn't speak English. It was fine. She was happy to see us. It's a really nice country.
Mm. Were you able to see some deforestation and all the terrible thing happening there with, the cutting of trees and all that?
Yeah, so like around Recife, they've cut all the forest. There's just little teeny remnants. It's almost all cane fields. The rest of where we were, it's so poor. It's the poorest part of Brazil. It's very arid and dry. They can't grow anything there. So there's really, they've cut down some of the wood because it's so slow growing. It's not going to grow back. So that's bad. But that part doesn't have as much habitat change as some other parts. And it was fun to go out to the island because that is mostly a national park. So they're trying very hard to preserve it.
Preserve it. Yeah, well, good.
Yeah, it is good.
Yeah.
I've not been to the Amazon yet. So James, have you been?
I've been to the Cerrado and I've been to the Pantanal.
Yeah. Have you seen a lot of habitat change?
Well, I haven't been there since before COVID, so I have not been there since this new president has tried to cut down the country.
Yeah.
And I hope he loses. He's coming up for election.
Yeah.
Meu avô lá no Congo era rei Bantu, mas aqui, meu senhor, ele é o rei do maracatu. Maracatu, pelo mundo, alegria e paixão. Somos senhores da terra e também dessa nação. Nada é top igual ao nosso, só bandeiras do trovão. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. 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 Tira uma fusa, bombeiro, que o lueiro vai cantar. A Gugu e chique, chique, que a nação vai esquentar. Vai mostrar a toda a gente, como a corte vai cantar. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Senhor, vem aqui estamos, com o toque animado. E marcha de guerra, como tudo que vem de longe. Quem anda aqui no tempo, sabe ver o dente novo. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. Espalhando pelo mundo, alegria e paixão. Somos senhores da terra e também dessa nação. Nada é golpe igual ao nosso, só bandeiras do trovão. Maracatu, oh mará, maracatu. 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 Tira uma coisa, bombeiro, que o lueiro vai cantar. A gogô e chique, chique, que a nação vai esquentar. Vai mostrar a toda a gente como a corte vai cantar. maracatu, obará, maracatu. Senhor, bem, aqui estamos com um toque animado. Mimimi, marcha de guerra, como tudo que vem de longe. Quem anda aqui no tempo, tá bobeiro, vem de novo. Maracatu, obará, maracatu. 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 Maracatu,